Okay, that's me. I've been working on forecasting problems, trying to make forecasting a science. And I've been doing that for about 57 years, and I've met a bunch of other people interested in the same thing. The statisticians have recently hijacked our, well, I won't go into that. I also have a side business. Is there anybody from the New York Times here today? Because I'm going to dedicate this to the New York Times. We're a household that gets the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, so I read both of them. And they constantly say they want to, this is science, is settled. We want it based on science. And I don't agree with the settled part. It's never settled. But I agree that it should be based on science. I think we just have a little difference about maybe what science means. So I'm going to try to explain that. That's my side business. I've been working on, I think I did my first paper about science methodology in around 1970. I made up a lot of slides, actually 33. You won't see all of them. I've withheld all the slides that relate to previous publications, but I wanted to give you a review of what's happened, and you will have the slides after the conference. You'll go through the complete set if you'd like. Now this set we'll get through hopefully in 20 minutes. If you went through the other set, I think maybe might go 20 hours, I'm not sure, because I have all the evidence you need. If I say something, I'll tell you why I said it. You go look at the paper, you can see what other people said and so forth. I'll put most of my emphasis on recent publications and especially on forthcoming publications. So I don't think I'll have any time for questions during this. People versus climate change, this isn't going to end. We still have a lot to do, and now there's all these court cases coming out about kids versus climate change, and they're going to fight hard. So I think we have to have some methods in process to address this. How can we show people are not following scientific methods? And I think Christopher Monckton set me up for a nice end of this talk when he said, asked Lamar Smith, are there any guidelines, anything we could give to somebody? There are. They're one page long, and I've got copies for you at the back of the room. This is all about the future. So it's obviously a science problem, a forecasting problems. I testified about this at one of Lamar Smith's hearings, and one of the Democrats said, well, what do you know about climate science? I said, I don't know anything about climate science. I'm a forecasting guy, So life is simple for me. I've got Willie Soon and Keston Green. They know a lot about science of climate change, but I'm the forecasting guy. So I want to summarize all this evidence, and maybe some of the others of you can think about the same thing. Get a complete summary of all you've done, make it available. It's very convenient to put it in a PowerPoint and give people access to all the papers. And I'm trying to set us up so we can fight all alarmist movements. It won't stop with global warming. There'll be the communists and the progressives and liberals will continue on to find things. So we have to have a procedure in mind. How do we nip this in the bud? We want to make it scientific in order to get something in as a regulation. So I'll talk to you about that. And there's a lot of people we want to contact. So I'm looking for you also, to circulate these slides to people you know. Okay, that's pretty much, we're through with that one already. So our long-term forecasts of dangerous global warming, scientific. So I approached that in a number of ways. First of all, I only know of 2 papers that claim to follow scientific principles in making forecasts. The 2 are by, Willie Soon and Keston Green and myself. And nobody's challenged that. If they think there's something wrong, that's fine. I know Einstein, there's this book I've started about Einstein's mistakes. He published a lot of mistakes. If you make a mistake, you fix it. So I'm happy with people doing replications and letting me know that I'm wrong. I'm so wrong that I'm now working on version 397 of the last paper I'm going to show you today. 397 versions, and we've been working on it for years, and it'll probably take me another 100. The IPC methods violate 81% of the 89 forecasting principles. How many people can do their job, normal job, and violate the way you're supposed to do it? These are principles of forecasting. These are the steps you should follow. If you look 100 years ahead, we did a lot of tests of predictability. We'd go back some point and we'd forecast ahead year by year up to 100 years. If you take years 90 to 100, the IPCC forecasts are 12 times larger than the forecast that we use, and I used also in the bet with Al Gore, that there's no long-term trend. Are they scientific? Okay, only 2 papers. Next thing, the tests on other data sets. We'll pick any data set you have. We'll go and look at it, or we recommend that other people do it. We've gone to data sets that go back to 112 AD. It doesn't matter what data. We don't look at any particular period. We just take the whole data set, which is one of the principles of forecasting. If you've got data, use it all. We get the same answer no matter what data set we use. So the global cooling hypothesis turned out to beat the global warming hypothesis in the thing we did from 112 AD. It was twice as accurate as the global warming hypothesis. Also no, because it's not scientific, because it ignores all of the golden rule of forecasting, which you don't know about yet, but I'll tell you shortly. And the Armstrong, Green, and Soon forecast violated only one. It violates Occam's razor. It should be more complex than it needs be. It fails to comply. We came up with 8 criteria for science, which I'll show you later. It ties into what Lamar Smith heard from Christopher Monckton today. Do you have a short list? This is our short list. It fails to comply with any of these scientific criteria. It fails to forecast what's the harm to people. It assumes that. There's no scientific forecast that we could find. I keep putting out these challenges. It fails to provide any evidence that these solutions will work. Paint your roof white and things like that. It fails to meet the 10 necessary conditions for a regulation to be effective. That's part of the iron law of regulation, which I'll get to later. It's similar to 23 earlier environmental alarms that look similar to global warming and that were supported by the government, and that all were wrong and all lost money. The golden rule of forecasting. What is the golden rule of forecasting? This is a paper that was published recently, and we noticed that certain interesting findings, like if you run regression analyses and then you're predicting, you can generally get a more effective prediction by converting all your prediction coefficients to a 1, called unit weights. Some of you might already know that literature. And you'll get better forecasts on out-of-sample, when you actually predict. You fit the data. So presumably, if you know the important variables, you don't even bother with regression. You just put a 1 in for every one and sum up the numbers. That is more effective than regression analysis. It drives economists crazy because they keep talking about how to get effective estimators. So the golden rule of forecasting is use cumulative knowledge to date. Be conservative. If you're not sure what's happening, the precautionary principle is the exact opposite. It says we don't know what's going to happen, so we got to do something. Well, it could be warmer, it could be colder too, right? So the golden rule that we came up with 28 guidelines for being conservative. It's a guide that can be used by non-experts. The guidelines came from 105 published studies. We go through the forecasting literature and found these studies. This is an astonishing one. I can't believe life when this is heaven for a researcher. Generally, we do something and it's statistically significant. Well, that doesn't matter, but gee, it helps like 2 or 3%. If you take the average guideline and you violate the guideline, you get a 40% penalty in accuracy. That's why this global warming thing on the long-term forecast is 12 times larger than our no-change forecast. Applied to the IPCC scenario, the golden rule was, we found that there were 20 of the golden rule checklist items that were relevant to forecasting climate change, and the IPCC violated all of them. The Armstrong, Green, and Soon model violated one. You can rate the models yourself. These are really simple checklists. I'll be passing out one at the end of the day, and you can take a look at it. Occam's razor, simple is better, traced back to Aristotle and maybe before, who knows. It's survived for centuries. I don't see many scientists that disagree. Well, I ran across one that disagreed one time, and then I had my go at him in the literature. But that's a well-established. But have you ever seen anybody test the predictive validity? How much will you save? Or do you really save? So we looked for that and couldn't find it, so we decided to do that. We had non-experts rate how complex these models were. And it's amazingly simple. We asked people, normal, actually students. I mean, they're better than normal, we're told. But you have to answer these questions. And they all seem to be able to answer the question. Actually, we use Mechanical Turk a lot because you can hire people, and compared to students, they're more reliable, they do it quickly, and they do it with better quality. So Mechanical Turk, I can send this out in a few days. I can get these ratings. Could you describe each of these 4 things? And they rate it on a 1 to 10 scale. Now, that seems really crude, doesn't it? So we didn't hold out much hope for this. We found 32 papers, 97 comparisons of the accuracy of simple versus complex. And mind you, the complex ones are usually from these statisticians that think they're going to improve the world with this complex approach. None of the papers found that complexity improved accuracy. And complexity increased the error by 27% on average. Astonishing. And you talk about complexity. People are seduced by complexity. Analysts use these complex methods, and they can give the client whatever they want. So you give me a bunch of data, you let me analyze it however I like, and I can deliver anything you'd like. They're impressed. You ask them if you give them a simple method, they think, I could have done that myself, So they're not willing to pay much. So they're willing to pay a lot more when you make it complex. And I came across this thing by T.C. Chamberlain, one of my real heroes in science, and I was so excited. I went and told Willie about this, and I said, and also he was in climate science. Oh yeah, Willie says, I knew that. Willie seems to know everything about climate science. So that's a pretty interesting quote there by T.C. Chamberlain from the 1890s. Simple forecasting checklist, ratings, IPC ratings of compliance with Occam's razor. They scored 19%. The no-change model scored 96%. The ratings, most of the ratings I give you, most of the checklists top out at about an hour. And if you have some experience, we can get them down to 15 or 20 minutes. Now, is the global warming alarm, that's another regulation. Is it consistent with the iron law of regulation? If it is, we've got our first exception. The iron law of regulation is, you can read it right there. That's what it says. We didn't invent it, but Keston and I thought it needed a lot more attention, so we've started a website called theironlawregulation.com. We invited people to say, maybe some regulations will work. Send us ones that work, and we'll find under what conditions, and that'd be a good way to develop new ones that work. We get zero responses. We searched literature, asked experts, and established the evidence. We established this website to identify the necessary conditions for a successful regulation. We came up with 10. And to provide evidence on whether regulation works or not. It always fails so far. To provide techniques, so we can forecast what's going to happen. We've come up with a couple of methods that the military was interested in, the CIA, of structured analogies and simulated interaction, which allow us to predict the outcome, the decisions made in complex conflict situations. And it was a tough sell. People in the CIA, they like stories. So, and we had evidence. They didn't like evidence either. We could provide a checklist for seeing which regulations are in need of revision. We could use the checklist for that. We can report regulations that are outrageous outcomes. Does it have this is the ratings there, the compliance of IPCC. Keston rated it and I rated it. We had almost a 0 he gave it 10. He wasn't sure. We usually do it independently, then we talk it over, So, relying only on scientific research. The scientific method has to replace advocacy with the scientific method. So you'll have a paper on guidelines for science. The checklist, I have a copy here. There's copies at the back. You can usually fill those out in a few minutes if you're trying to rate a particular scientific paper. What does it mean to say compliance to science? Well, think about regulations or scientific papers you've read. One tip, we also go through journals and rate papers on how well they conform to the scientific method. And I used to think about maybe 10% of papers in my field and other social sciences were maybe useful, and then now it looks like maybe 0.1%. I mean, people just, they don't do it. They don't follow the scientific method, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. The scientific method is we have to be objective, have useful findings, have full disclosure of methods, comprehensive review of knowledge, valid and simple methods, experimental evidence, and conclusions that are consistent with the evidence. We were working on for example, with full disclosure, we were working on polar bear forecasts, and we found that we were asked to review the government's polar bear forecast. And we said, could you send us the data? And they wrote back and said, no. They said, well, why not? Oh, we're using it. So we had to do it without knowing what the data were. Willie got the data for another place. Are the IPCC scenarios consistent with, compliant with science? You can make your own ratings. They have high inter-rater reliability. We're using them currently, or at least I am, to select applicants to the PhD, people looking for jobs as assistant professors at our place. I use that rating. I'm trying to convince the whole department. I have a very supportive department head, and he's supportive in this movement. I'm trying to convince others to try. And it seems to have a big effect. When I give my ratings of compliance to science, this seems to affect the votes in the department. Oh, yes, why? Why is this all happening? Why don't they do the scientific method? Nobody asks them. You know, you send something to a journal, they don't tell you what you have to do. They hire somebody to be a researcher. They don't say, here's what science is, we want you to do it. I can get people from Mechanical Turk to follow this, but if I give them say, follow these rules, and they'll do it because I pay them. It's easy to do. Commitment is easy to do. If you say, this is your job, you're supposed to follow science. If you don't, then we'll find somebody else that will. What can I say here? Why don't they follow science? And also, nobody asks them, they're rewarded for doing... Can I have like 3 more minutes? Okay. So they're not asked. They're rewarded for doing non-scientific research. One of my favorite examples is statistical test of statistical significance. Got to get that working here. That's invalid. It's been over 100 years we've been fighting the fight against that, and it's simply invalid. Even the inventor thought it wasn't going to amount to anything. Student was his name to the Gossett. You get rewarded then for following an invalid thing. So how do they handle that? Well, they cheat. If they don't get statistically significant results, then you throw out variables, add variables, and eventually you get what you want. In some journals, 100% of all quantitative papers have to have statistical significance. Have to. My big thing is advocacy. People are asked to come up with certain answers. And our whole field, that's been a general movement ever since I've been there, just gets worse every year. And the reason is funded research. I'm proud to say that I actually tried in the future, but I couldn't get anything. Julian Simon said, they'll never give you a grant anyways. So I've done my whole career with lots of publications, and I have never gotten a research grant. And I'm proud of that now. It leads to advocacy. It leads to complex writing because reviewers, and there's a fascinating research on that. They even have papers that are written by computer. They put in typical words, and then they create sentences out of them, and then they submit it to journals, and they get accepted. There was a big ruckus a few years ago. About 100 papers had to be removed from one of the journals. Advocacy is my main thing that we've got to overcome. And the best way to do that is, as the greats said, and it goes back many years, the government has no business in research. Maybe research in killing people, because they don't like to do that in the free market. You don't like to go around designing things to kill people. Maybe you can do research there, but in trying to create a better life, government has no role to play in science. Oh, they put irrelevance words in there, like anything that happened to do with the brain. All right, and we have all these irrelevant things, like how many citations do you have, or how many papers? That's ridiculous. The only thing you're interested in is, what have you discovered? That's what Benjamin Franklin, that's why he founded the University of Pennsylvania. He said there are 2 things you have to do. One is to find useful knowledge, and then disseminate it. And right now we have a new one. I'm not going to say what it is. What should we ask your regulators? Comply with the science. Audit it. Don't just tell them to fill it out. Audit it and make sure they followed it. And dismiss those that fail to comply. Reject and revoke compliant regulations. Require scientific evidence for all. I love the work done by the Institute for Justice. They find things that are really ridiculous at everybody, no matter what your party said. And they say, we'll fight this case. If we lose, maybe that's good, because then it'll go to the Supreme Court and we'll win there. They've lost only one Supreme Court decision so far, and that was the little pink house, forget the Keogh case, yeah. So that's a good strategy we could try. Charles Mary's, yeah, I'm glad I got this. This is, Charles Mary's just a wonderful book by the people, and he's proposing the Madison Fund. The company spent a lot of money to prepare for the inspections. The Madison Fund would insure people against, so the companies would pay for insurance for this. And if you get, as long as you're doing the right thing, don't worry. If the government comes along with a regulation and they think you didn't do it right, well, they're going to get fought by the Madison Fund. If they did it wrong, then the insurance company doesn't invite you. Like if you actually run over somebody, you're your plan doesn't help you with your automobile. Okay, action steps, there's a bunch of them. Maybe you can send this out to a bunch of people, and I'm out of here. Thank you very much.